Let's get to second acts. I think it's your masterpiece.
Yeah.
Having read everything that you've written, pretty much, that you've chosen to show to the public. This is what I say on the back of second acts. With second acts, Tim W. Brown may well have written his masterpiece. In this surprising, satisfying novel, he channels Twain both by updating a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court and through Bunny, Brown's most vivid character to date, an homage to Jim in Huckleberry Finn. And yet the end result is not at all derivative, but unexpectedly personal and unique. Funny, engaging, relatable, and even educational, Second Acts is a great read. And I mean every word of that. Love this book. Give us the premise, and then we'll talk about Bunny.
Okay, well, the book, as far as its content goes, crosses many genres. It sort of starts out as a time travel saga, quickly morphs into a historical novel. There's a bit of magic realism in there. There's doses of speculative fiction. And again, the time travel aspect. It mainly follows the protagonist, whose name is Dan Connor, who goes to the past in pursuit of his runaway wife, who has gone to the past with the inventor of time travel technology, a University of Chicago physics professor. And all three of these characters, in essence, start their lives over again, and they begin the second act in their lives. And
so you're contesting Fitzgerald.
There's that play in the title. That was, I think, one of the reasons why the publisher and I settled on this title, because we realized that all of the characters, including the fourth, which we'll talk about in a moment, Listening Rabbit, all are experiencing second acts in their lives. And, you know, Fitzgerald used to say, or said famously, that there are no second acts in American lives, and I just, strongly disagree. There are boundless examples of Americans who have second acts in their lives.
Right.
Think about Ulysses S. Grant, the Civil War general. Started out as a failed storekeeper and eventually became, the winner of the Civil War and eventually president.
Right.
Second act.
Yeah.
Think about Ronald Reagan, the president. He had probably even three acts.
Yeah.
He was an actor. Then he was in his post-acting speaker career, and then finally went into politics as the governor of California and eventually president. So,
and speaking of politics and Republicans, let's hope that Sarah Palin does not have a second act.
Well, she's enjoying quite a more than 15 minutes. She's up to about 45, I think. We'll see how that goes.
Okay, so we have the three sides of your triangle, your love triangle. There's Dan Connor, the main protagonist, Bruce Bilson, his rival who invents time travel a couple of years from now.
Right.
And then Bruce and Dan's wife, Rachel Levy, the third part of the triangle. The two of them escape into the 1830s, and make their way to New York. But the book really takes off when the triangle turns into a parallelogram, and Rachel and Dan are together, or Rachel and Bruce are together. Dan needs someone with him to really fill this picture out, and who is that?
Well, this is his sidekick that he discovers in Frontier Chicago, being that the time travel itself occurs at what is now Fermilab in
suburban Chicago. Yeah.
That's where the story begins, at the site of Fermilab in the 1830s. The characters proceed eastward, which is kind of unusual at the time. Most people were moving
west. Go west, young man, yeah.
But they were intending on finding fortune and the second act in their lives.
They brought some Krugerrands from the future.
They brought gold to kind of help pave the way. Listening Rabbit is the sidekick that Dan encounters in Frontier Chicago. She's also known as Bunny. And she is a Potawatomi two-spirit Indian, a transgender Indian, a brave living the life of a squaw. And
in many Native American tribes, I think someone who was androgynous,
right,
was assumed to have power, right?
Well, they were valued mates in that they could, tote more water and hoe more corn than a woman who was physically a female. And as well, they were thought to have mystical properties and could, see into the future or into the past. And she demonstrates this numerous times. I like to say, being that, she's male, that she can both look into your soul as well as kick anybody's ass who, dares to bother you.
Well, that sounds like a good segue into the passage I'd like you to read.
Okay.
You want to set that up and give it to us?
Sure. By this time in the book, the characters have progressed from frontier Chicago to western New York. They, in fact, rest a time there in Buffalo, Fredonia. There's a trip in a couple of chapters that takes place on the Erie Canal. They end up in Albany, which was where we're at now, and eventually they make their way down the Hudson River to New York City. And Rachel and Bruce hide out, and Dan and Bunny are looking for them in the large metropolis of New York City of the 1830s. And
where crime was an issue, just as it is now.
Crime was way worse than it is now. Ever since Rudolph Giuliani, we don't have such issues anymore in New York City. But it was very commonplace back in the 1830s and as recently as the 1990s.
Yeah.
So I will start off there. It's set in the winter in approximately 1834, and this is Dan speaking. A knavish pair foolishly set upon Bunny and me one evening outside of Fraunces Tavern, an historical landmark where George Washington himself had supped after we had stepped inside to wet our whistles. We probably looked like easy prey, a tipsy gentleman slipping and sliding in the snow while escorting his drunken lady friend. "Your money or your lives," growled the first assailant, who in filthy shirt sleeves evidently needed my money to purchase a winter coat. He had perhaps the worst complexion I had ever seen, mountainous pimples and whiteheads and blackheads on top of smallpox pits. "You best obey if you want to live," seconded the other as he displayed a knife. He wore a frayed wool coat that perhaps he traded off wearing with his partner. Absent the knife, he could have killed with his pungent odor. Bunny took one look at the knife and burst out laughing. Emboldened by alcohol, I too laughed, for the robber wielded a dagger not much larger than a common penknife. With all of the belligerence he could muster, he waved it threateningly in front of our faces, his awful smell wafting behind the figure eights he drew in the air. "You'll find this funny, all right," he said upon lunging at my midsection. The other robber stood by, roguishly smiling, savoring how his partner was about to teach us a lesson in response to our insolence. Before I could react and dodge the blow, Bunny parried the move by grabbing my attacker's wrist, bending his arm back and forcing him down onto his knees. "Help! Help!" the robber cried to his partner, who froze, dumbstruck, unable or unwilling to come to his friend's aid. I also was awestruck by Bunny's maneuver, and I stood aside to let her manage the perilous situation after her own fashion. While holding the robber's other flailing arm at bay, Bunny wrenched his hand, which still clutched the knife, against the side of his head. With a quick flick of his wrist, she caused him to slice off his own ear. "You bloody redskin!" he screamed, dropping the knife and frantically patting the snow in search of his severed ear. After finding it beside his left knee, he raised it to his head and attempted in vain to place it back where it belonged. Because he lacked the means, like needle and thread, to reattach it, it fell once again onto the street. He repeated this action a couple more times before finally scooping up the pulpy mess and running after his partner, who had meanwhile disappeared up the street. On this occasion, at least, the blood staining the street belonged to the robber and not the robbed. "Who he calling bloody redskin?" Bunny asked me. "Him the one with bloody red skin." Then she let out a blood-curdling war whoop that drew curious faces out of every window up and down Pearl Street. Our state of affairs, dismissed by the neighborhood as an ordinary street altercation, heads popped back inside again, windows were lowered, and shutters were slammed. Bunny picked up the knife and slipped it into her handbag. She has kept it to this very day as a keepsake of the one instance in her life when she played the role of brave instead of squaw.
Wonderful. Was that as fun to write as it is to read or hear?
Well, the whole book was honestly a lot of fun to write, as fun as writing can be. It's like it's agonizing work, and you can go into many places you really don't want to go inside your own insecurities and so on and so forth.
Sure.
But as far as projects go, this was a fun one. I did a lot of research. I estimated I read about 10,000 pages of research material. I did things from books and monographs to sermons. I saw a play, for example, that was set in the 1830s called Metamora. It was probably the best known, widest selling play of the 1830s, and starred the huge actor of the time, Edwin Forrest.
You have Dan and Bunny attending a performance of that.
Right, that occurs. I visited Old Sturbridge Village, which is a settlement in Massachusetts, maybe 100 miles from here, if not that far, which is one of these places like Williamsburg, that captures a period of time, and people in the town act out roles of townspeople, and it took place in the 1830s.
And you gave a knife to two of them and asked them to mug you.
Right, exactly. We tried it out, and figured out where all of the
blocking.
It's sort of like stage combat. But so amidst all of these different things, the time travel, the physics, things about money and food and Potawatomis, and just a whole bunch of different information, as well as the political times, which were very active. I often tell people that 1830s were a lot like the 1960s. There was a lot of reform fervor and a lot of social protest movements like abolitionism and feminism and radical vegetarianism, as well as other.
Elsewhere in the nation, John Brown was building up steam at this time.
That's right, not too far from here. He was based in the Adirondack Mountains, and set up his operation there, and then.
So an in-between time, which is always, I think, an interesting time to set a piece. I did want to talk to you about research because it reads as very authentic, and I say this, of course, as someone who has not been in the 1830s. But I suspect that if we could take the book back there, they wouldn't find too many errors. You really did your homework. And I get the sense reading it that it wasn't for the purpose of window dressing or merely period detail. But I'm guessing a lot of your plot points actually derived from that research, yes?
That is very true. Some of the historical personages that occur in the book, for example, Samuel J. Tilden, he's a character, eventually ran for president in 1876 and lost in a similar situation as Bush versus Gore.
Lost to?
Rutherford B. Hayes. Right. He actually won the popular vote, but the House voted the other candidate in.
Right.
Albert Gallatin was originally Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of the Treasury, and later in life, in his second act, he was the president of the Bank of New York, and in fact, he was the founder of New York University and is buried there.
You take these characters on a pig hunt.
And exactly. And snippets of things that I would read about, such as the pig hunt scene, actually
in Manhattan.
Occurred. In Manhattan. Manhattan in the 1830s really only went up to about 20th Street.
Right.
And even that was sort of the fringes, kind of like
the wilds.
Fields,
the wilds,
where they start at the edge of town. And people had pigs and chickens and livestock and so forth, of course. And the pigs would escape. And every spring, the townspeople would have their annual pig shoot.
It's a wonderful scene in the book, and as someone who used to work in public relations, I'd like to suggest that you and your publisher arrange for a contemporary Manhattan pig hunt.
That would be
capitalize.
Great. We could, maybe if there's some sort of economic program like the New Deal, where we have to kill pigs to raise prices, we could send them in northern Manhattan, followed by a bunch of people with guns.
It beats government cheese.
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to Bunny for a minute. I don't know if I was the first, I know I'm not the last, to compare her to Jim in Huckleberry Finn. Do you see that parallel? I mean, in both cases, we're taking a member of an oppressed minority group of the time.
Right.
And giving that character great dignity, while still very authentically communicating how that person was treated in his or her day.